Should the National Health Service be on the table in trade talks?
No, not at all. I have nothing to do with it. Never even thought about it.
In this one, we're going to be taking a look at whether Johnson is really planning to sell off the NHS. We asked you if you wanted to hear about it in our video where we compared the NHS plans of each party, and the result was, well, resounding. In fact, some people have called us out in comment sections of our subsequent videos. So you've waited since the weekend, so I'm sure you can wait 20 seconds more. If you're feeling in a happy, festive, giving spirit, consider picking up our Season 3 pin badges, where all of the profits go to charities working in their respective countries. You could even give them as a Christmas gift. That's double giving. Or triple the giving by spending £40 or more, and we'll even give you a Christmas card signed by the TLDR podcast team, of which I am actually a part. Links to the store can be found below. So, the idea that Johnson's going to sell off the NHS has been Labour's main attack line since Corbyn pulled that prop stunt in the leadership debate.
What we know of the government's proposals, what we know of what Mr. Johnson has done, is a series of secret meetings with the United States in which they were proposing to open up our NHS markets, as they call them, to American companies. Freedom of Information Act request was made in order to find out what happened at these meetings. That's what happened at these meetings. Every single line of this document redacted out. A document here of US-UK negotiations, summary of specific negotiating objectives, full
Johnson.
Market access for US products to our National Health Service. You're going to sell
Johnson,
our National Health Service out to the United States and Big Pharma.
Using a prop is obviously amazing for the drama of a debate, and a heavily redacted Freedom of Information document always looked dodgy, but Johnson was adamant that he had no plans to sell off the NHS.
This is an absolute invention. It is completely untrue. There are no circumstances whatever in which this government or any Conservative government will put the NHS on the table in any trade negotiation. Our NHS will never be for sale.
Luckily for us, the full unredacted document were leaked by someone at the Department for International Trade to Reddit, apparently, and in a press conference last Wednesday, Corbyn claimed that the document left Johnson's denial, quote-unquote, in tatters.
451 pages of unredacted documents and information. These uncensored documents leave Boris Johnson's denials in absolute tatters. Voters need to ask themselves some very serious questions. Is the NHS safe in Boris Johnson's hands? We've now got evidence that under Boris Johnson, the NHS is on the table and will be up for sale.
So, what is actually in this groundbreaking document? Well, first things first, it's actually 5 separate documents. They're basically meeting minutes from 5 separate meetings between US and UK trade officials as part of the UK-US Trade and Investment Working Group, taking place in London and Washington, starting in July 2017. As you might have realised, Johnson was not Prime Minister in July 2017, so it's a bit weird to accuse him of wanting to sell off the NHS. In fact, even if he was, the Prime Minister doesn't appear in any of the meetings, and for most part, it's only officials. A government minister, Liam Fox, is only mentioned in the first meeting. Also, the quote that Corbyn appeared to read off the document doesn't actually appear in the document. The quote, full market access for US products to our National Health Service, actually comes from a unilateral US trade document, the Summary of Specific Negotiating Objectives, from February 2019. Again, Johnson only became Prime Minister in July, so this is even before his time, and this is also a unilateral trade document, so the US can put whatever it wants in here and the UK doesn't sign it off, making it more of a wish list than any kind of agreement with the UK. So let's go through the documents one by one. The first one is actually pretty uninteresting, and the UK actually notes that the US did not raise other expected asks on, for example, grace period or patent linkage issues in this first meeting, so nothing too weird yet. The second one is a bit juicier, with the UK expecting that the impact of some patent issues raised on NHS access to generic drugs, i.e. cheaper drugs, will be a key consideration going forward, and noting that the US also typically seeks provisions for grace periods, data exclusivity, patent linkages and patent term extensions relating to the market approval process. Now, maybe that's not the juicy stuff you were hoping for, but let me explain this patent issue. Basically, the UK and the NHS typically don't let drug companies hold on to patents for long, which means companies can't create drugs and then monopolise their supply, creating artificially high prices, whereas the US is more relaxed about it. The NHS also has the medical cost watchdog NICE, which advises on the cost effectiveness of new drugs, and because of its size, the NHS has more bargaining power than independent insurers in the US. It's for these reasons that drugs cost on average 2.5 times as much in the US as they do in the UK. So it's worrying to a lot of people that the patent issue is one of the main talking points in these documents. To try and limit these concerns, the Conservative manifesto insists that the price the NHS pays for drugs will not be on the table. Anyway, the third document from March 2018 actually seems to suggest that the US is not interested in the NHS. It reads, "The query about health insurance was likely a fishing expedition to check the tone of our response. We do not currently believe the US has a major offensive interest in this space." The fourth one from July 2018 includes some more stuff about patents, but nothing that substantial. And the fifth one from November 2018 notes that the UK has received some 160,000 responses from the public consultation on trade with the US, a large fraction of which were concerned about protecting the NHS from American pharmaceuticals. So, if you read the documents, they don't show that Johnson plans to sell off the NHS. Maybe they go some way to showing the US wants the NHS, or at least medical contracts and patent legislation, to be on the table in some free trade deal. But just because the US wants it doesn't mean the UK, or Johnson specifically, plans to sell it. And, for that matter, it's an open question as to whether the US even thinks the NHS might be on the table. As the third document says, the UK officials did not currently believe the US has a major offensive interest in the NHS. So, why does that US trade document say that the US expects full market access to the NHS? Well, it's likely because the US typically favours a negative list approach when it comes to negotiating trade deals. Essentially, negative listing is when, instead of going through sectors one by one, you assume that everything is on the table and go from there. And actually, if the UK wants as comprehensive a trade deal as it seems to want, this is a sensible starting point. If you want a trade deal covering all sectors, it's more efficient to start off assuming that everything is on the table. This is why US Ambassador Woody Johnson said he expected the entire economy to be up for trade negotiations. Again, this doesn't mean that the UK has to put the NHS up for sale. It's just the US's opening negotiating stance. Originally, Trump said something similar during his state visit in June. He said that everything with a trade deal is on the table, before changing his mind literally the next day, saying, "I don't see it being on the table, as the NHS was something that I would not consider part of trade." More recently, during the Farage interview in late October, Trump dismissed claims that the US would take over the NHS as ridiculous and made up by Corbyn.
Should the National Health Service be on the table in trade talks?
No, not at all. I have nothing to do with it. Never even thought about it. I don't even know where that rumor started. We have absolutely nothing to do with it, and we wouldn't want to. If you handed it to us on a silver platter, we want nothing to do with it.
It's probably not worth analysing Trump's comments in too much depth, given that any trade negotiations will probably only start after the 2020 presidential elections, so potentially with a new president, and because Trump is liable to sudden changes of mind. Regardless, the long and short of it seems to be that the NHS will not necessarily be part of any future UK-US trade deal, even if it is part of the US opening negotiating stance. This doesn't mean that Johnson won't open up the NHS to American competition, but frankly, there's basically zero evidence that he intends to do this. The unredacted documents that relate to meetings before he was Prime Minister don't show this, and the fact that the US's opening position includes the NHS is easily explained by the US predilection for negative listing. Moreover, the US's opening position isn't something that the UK has any say over. It's purely what the US would like. So, that's the claim that Boris is going to sell off the NHS. Hopefully this doesn't sound too anti-Corbyn, but looking at the facts, it just doesn't add up. I'm also going to record this last bit because I know that we get a lot of comments saying that they don't like the abrupt change of narrator at the end, so you can also hit the bell icon if you want to be notified with all of our future videos. And you can also search for us on social media with just TLDR News. And lastly, if you want your name to be featured at the end of this video, like these people, you can back us on Patreon. Jack has way too many things he says at the end of the videos.